I'm Claire Monroe, 34 years old, and last Christmas Eve, my mother told me to cancel my planned drive to Connecticut and cook a 7-course dinner for 25 of my sister's VIP friends on 24 hours' notice. I stood over an open suitcase in my Manhattan condo, a plane ticket to Florida on the counter, and felt the old heat rise behind my ribs. For 15 years, I'd worn the family helper label like an apron that never came off while Jenna glided through rooms my work had prepared. That night, the demand came with crystal polite threats about people who matter as if I did not. On my laptop, an email from Veronica Chase, CEO of Summit Hospitality, lit up like a lighthouse. A $2 million partnership was waiting if I showed up in person on December 26th at 9 a.m. I thought of my team counting on me the mortgage payments they'd just taken on the new schools their kids would attend. Somewhere between my mother's orders and that contract, a line finally drew itself. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it. I was raised in a narrow salt box house at the edge of town, where winters smelled like cinnamon toast and damp wool and summer dinners happened on a splintered deck under a string of warm bulbs. My grandmother taught me to set a table like a promise iron. The napkins lined the forks, checked the chairs, so no one wobbled, and she said, "Kindness is not soft, it is made of steadiness." My parents valued appearances, and I thought that meant clean collars and good grades. But in our house it grew into something heavier. Donated centerpieces snapped for photographs, handshakes for the men with the biggest rings, a habit of praising the child who polished well in daylight. I learned early to notice the small things. People never forget the coffee refilled before anyone asked, the extra chair pulled in from the hall, and somewhere along the way those gestures became my identity more than my name. When guests arrived, I moved like a shadow with a tray, while Jenna gave tours of a house I had set for them. Money changed the air when my father's real estate deals started landing. It made rooms bigger and voices sharper. We traded our little house for a 3-story place with a curved staircase and a dining room big enough to echo. I was 19 and working 2 shifts a day, morning prep at a bakery in town, late-night plating at a wedding venue to pay for culinary school that I would eventually put on hold. The new neighborhood had lawns that looked measured and neighbors who knew the price of every car on the block. Jenna was 16, quick with a smile and quicker with names, and my mother said she had the touch for society work. I wasn't jealous at first. I was busy learning how to build a menu that held together the way a good story does. By the time the garden crew arrived twice a week, and the front door was always smudged with handshakes, there was an unspoken assignment in our family. Jenna was the introduction, and I was the service. The contrast grew starker when I moved to the city. I rented a small apartment above a dry cleaner where the hallway smelled like starch, and I saved every extra dollar in a glass jar until the balance in my account finally let me breathe. New York was loud and humbling. I biked to markets before dawn and learned which fishmonger would tell me the truth. I registered Horizon Table with the state on a winter morning and bought my first set of folding tables secondhand. The man selling them said, "These held up for 1,000 guests, and I believed they could hold up for me." My family assumed I was between jobs, and when I came home for holidays, my mother pressed a list into my hands while Jenna floated through the foyer in something silk. In those years, I stopped correcting anyone. I let them call me helpful. I let them think my car was borrowed. I let them decide what I was. And I hid what I was building because it was safer than explaining that I wanted to make something that didn't depend on our last name. The more Horizon Table grew, the less I spoke about it at home. My head chef, Paula Reyes, could turn a crate of late summer tomatoes into a memory. My operations director, Evan Brooks, solved problems before most people could name them. And our CFO, Nate Coleman, ran numbers like a steady drumbeat. We served corporate retreats and museum galas and small weddings where fathers cried into their napkins, and I learned to stand back and watch a room settle into warmth. When I did share a win, once a regional award that meant we were getting noticed, my mother pivoted to Jenna's new client, and the moment slipped away like steam. After a while, the silence stopped hurting. It just became the way things were. I turned that quiet into work, and the work turned into a company that could carry other people's futures besides mine. Last December, the house in Connecticut wore its usual holiday armor wreaths on the windows, candles in the glass, a wreath so large the door sighed under it. My mother called with the familiar tone, the one that said the decision had already been made, and rattled off a menu that would take a team a full day to execute. She said executives from Summit Hospitality were coming as Jenna's guests, and it had to be perfect, then reminded me where she kept the Waterford and which forks were reserved for fish. She did not ask what I was doing on Christmas Eve. She did not ask where I was flying in the morning. I stood by the window and watched the city lights spray across the park while my flight confirmation blinked on my phone, and I understood that if I stepped into that kitchen one more time on their terms, I might not step back out as myself. I have always believed in setting a place for people, but belief alone cannot carry a life. The night before my flight, I slipped Veronica Chase's email into my travel folder and zipped my suitcase until the teeth locked smooth. 25 guests would still arrive in Connecticut. A polished table would still wait under the chandelier. And for the first time in 15 years, the person they expected in that kitchen would not be there when the doorbell rang. The morning after that phone call, I woke to soft light filtering through the blinds and the faint hum of city traffic far below. My packed suitcase sat by the door like a quiet promise. For a few moments, I watched the sun climb the glass towers beyond Central Park and thought about the conversation that still echoed in my head. My mother's tone, so sharp it could slice through anything, her absolute certainty that I would obey those things, had shaped most of my adult life. But that morning they felt distant, like a script I had already stepped out of. The plane ticket on the counter was more than a travel plan. It was my way of saying no without having to raise my voice. Around 9, my phone lit up with a text from Jenna. "Mom says you're cooking tomorrow. Don't mess it up. Important people are coming." I set the phone face down on the table and poured coffee into my favorite mug, the chipped blue one I'd had since college. Steam curled above it as I opened my laptop. A new message waited from Veronica Chase's assistant, confirming dinner with her team on Christmas night and the final meeting the next morning. Seeing my name next to hers, two women who had built something from the ground up, made everything feel solid again. Still, my mother's words came back in fragments as I worked through the day. 7 mains, 10 sides. Use the Waterford. These people matter. She had always measured value by who was sitting at her table, never by who said it. I had spent most of my life arranging other people's comfort, while mine waited quietly on the back burner. I thought about every Thanksgiving since I was 17, standing over a stove while laughter drifted in from the dining room. No one had ever asked me to sit down. That afternoon, I opened the folder holding my contract with Summit Hospitality. The embossed gold letters, Horizon Table, still gave me a small jolt of pride. 5 years of 16-hour days were tucked into those pages. 3 kitchens, 50 employees, and more events than I could count. It had grown quietly like ivy, finding light through concrete. My parents didn't know about any of it. To them, I was still between jobs, still the daughter who couldn't quite find her place. The truth was, I had found it years ago. I just stopped telling them about it because they never cared to listen. By evening, the city was wrapped in its December glow. Storefronts shimmered with garlands, and somewhere down the street, a saxophone played "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas." I packed my laptop, my tablet, and a folder of presentation notes. Each detail in the plan had been checked twice: flight at 8, hotel car, waiting at the Fort Lauderdale airport, dinner at the resort at 7. Paula had texted earlier, wishing me luck. "The team's rooting for you, boss," she'd written, followed by a string of clapping hands. I smiled at the screen. Those were my people, the ones who believed without needing proof. Just as I zipped my carry-on, my phone rang again. The caller ID read Mom. I let it ring once before I answered. "Claire." Thank goodness, she started her voice brisk as ever. "I hope you're not still planning that silly trip. We need you here. Jenna's guests are expecting a proper meal." I could almost see her perfectly composed in her kitchen with a planner open on the counter. "Mom, I told you I can't," I said evenly. "I have a meeting." "A meeting?" She laughed short and sharp. "You're not a corporate executive. Stop pretending." My hand tightened around the phone. "It's important," I replied. "I'm flying out tonight." There was a pause, then the tone I knew by heart. If you walk away from this family on Christmas Eve, don't bother coming back." Her voice softened only to twist the knife. "You'll regret it when you're alone tomorrow night." I looked at the suitcase waiting by the door and felt something inside me steady. "Then I guess this is goodbye for now," I said. The silence that followed was thick enough to touch. She started to speak, but I had already ended the call. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated again. This time, Jenna. "Mom's losing it. Stop being dramatic. Just come help." Another message followed before I could respond. "I'll pay you $200 if you cook." I almost laughed out loud. My company's private event rate started at $5,000. I typed back a short reply. "I'm not available. Hire a caterer." Her response came fast. "You're really selfish." I left it unread. On a notepad beside the sink, I wrote down 3 local catering companies that handled last-minute emergencies and left it by the door a small peace offering that no one would likely see. The rest of the evening moved in quiet rhythm. I ordered takeout, double-checked my presentation slides, and packed a folder with printed copies of the proposal. Around 6, I requested a car to JFK. Outside, snow drifted softly over the city. I thought of my parents' house an hour away, its long driveway lined with lanterns, the smell of pine candles, the polished floors, ready for guests who would never know how many hands it took to make them shine. For 15 years, I had been one of those unseen hands. Tonight, for the first time, I was stepping out of that role. At the airport, the line for security crawled, everyone bundled in coats and scarves. I found a seat near the gate, opened my tablet, and reviewed the contract again. Veronica's final email flashed at the top. "Looking forward to finally meeting you in person, Claire. Your company's work speaks for itself." I read the line twice, letting the words settle. Across the waiting area, a family with young kids laughed over cocoa, their luggage piled around them like fortresses. The youngest boy waved at me and grinned. For some reason, it steadied me more than anything else that day. The plane lifted from the runway just after 8. Below, the city spread like a field of stars, the East River catching light in thin silver ribbons. I pressed my forehead to the window and thought about how many times I'd driven that same distance north instead of south, how many times I'd chosen their comfort over my own future. I closed my eyes and let the hum of the engines carry me forward. By the time I reached Florida, the air smelled of salt and citrus. A driver held a sign with my name at arrivals, and within an hour, I was standing in the lobby of the oceanfront resort where our meeting would take place. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the dark Atlantic waves breaking under a pale moon. On the desk in my suite sat a bottle of champagne and a handwritten note. "Welcome, Ms. Monroe. Excited for tomorrow." I unpacked slowly, placing the Horizon Table folder on the nightstand. For once, the space around me matched the life I'd built. I couldn't sleep right away. Messages kept flashing across my phone screen, dozens from my mother, a handful from Jenna, even one from my father asking me to be reasonable. I turned the phone face down and let the sound of the waves fill the room. Somewhere far north, the dinner table would be gleaming, the doorbell ringing, and my absence spreading through the house like a crack they couldn't ignore. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the balcony glass, painting the walls in gold. I poured coffee and opened my email. A message from Nate confirmed the financial projections were uploaded, and Paula had sent a quick good luck text with a picture of the kitchen crew giving thumbs up. The team was ready. I glanced at the itinerary again: dinner with Veronica and her executives tonight, presentation tomorrow morning. Everything depended on these 2 days. Then another email appeared, subject line, "Urgent Christmas Eve dinner guest list." It was from my mother. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Attached was a detailed menu, wine pairings, and a note. These guests could change Jenna's career. One of them is Veronica Chase, CEO of Summit Hospitality. Do not embarrass us. My stomach tightened. Veronica, the very same woman I was meeting in less than 48 hours, would be sitting at my parents' table expecting to be served by their unemployed daughter. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. I stared at the screen for a long time. In another version of my life, I might have driven upstate out of guilt, cooked until dawn, and smiled while they took credit for every compliment. But that version of me no longer existed. I had worked too hard to keep hiding behind someone else's story. I closed the email, shut my laptop, and walked out onto the balcony. The ocean stretched endlessly ahead, a line of blue breaking against the morning light. Tomorrow would decide more than a contract, it would decide who I was allowed to be. Somewhere in Connecticut, my family was setting the table and waiting for a daughter who wasn't coming. The ocean was still silver in the early morning light when I stepped onto the balcony with my coffee. The air was soft and cool, carrying the sound of waves breaking somewhere below. I had slept, but not deeply. Every few hours I woke half expecting another call from home. When none came, the quiet felt heavier than I wanted to admit. Downstairs, the resort's courtyard shimmered with polished glass tables waiting for guests who hadn't yet risen. I had a few hours before my meeting with Veronica's team, but the calm only made me restless. I opened my laptop and went over the proposal one more time. Every slide, every number, every detail of the partnership had to be flawless. This was the kind of deal that changed the shape of a company forever. I glanced at the clock. Barely 8 a.m. in Florida meant it was already mid-morning back in Connecticut. My family would be in full motion by now, rushing to prepare for the Christmas Eve dinner I was supposed to be cooking. I imagined my mother standing at the counter with her planner open, calling out instructions no one could meet fast enough. Jenna would be adjusting her hair in the hallway mirror, her smile rehearsed for guests she needed to impress. For 15 years, I'd been part of that routine, moving in rhythm with everyone else. This time, the rhythm went on without me. Around 10, my phone lit up again. The screen filled with messages, first from Jenna, then from my father. "Mom's nervous," he wrote. "Maybe come home just for dinner. You can fly out tomorrow." I put the phone down without answering. I had spent too many years shifting my life around everyone else's comfort. There wasn't a version of this where I could do both. I focused on the slides again until the anxiety began to quiet. By noon, I was ready. That evening, as the sun began to fall behind the water, I walked into the resort's private dining room for the pre-meeting dinner. The space glowed with low light and ocean reflections that flickered against the glass. Veronica arrived last, wearing a crisp white suit that made her look like she'd stepped out of an ad for her own company. "Claire," she said, smiling as she shook my hand, "it's so good to finally meet you in person. I've been following your work for years." I thanked her and introduced Paula and Nate, who had flown in that morning to join me. Dinner flowed easily, fresh seafood, citrus wine, and talk about strategy. It was one of those meetings where everything clicked naturally. When we finished, Veronica leaned back in her chair, satisfied. "I think we're ready for tomorrow," she said. 9 a.m. sharp. "And Claire, your story how you built Horizon Table without outside investors, it's exactly what I want this brand to stand beside." Her words felt like the first exhale after holding my breath too long. Later that night, I sat on the edge of the bed scrolling through my inbox. Among new client inquiries and supplier updates was one unread email from my mother's subject line, "Christmas Eve update." Against better judgment, I opened it. The message was a long list of instructions, garnish details, serving times, which plates matched, which entrees. She ended with, "These people are very important, especially the woman from Summit Hospitality. Please make sure you don't embarrass us." I stared at the screen. Veronica. She was sitting in Connecticut right now, expecting dinner from the daughter my mother called between jobs. I set the laptop aside and rubbed my temples. Fate had a strange sense of timing. I tried to imagine the scene unfolding back home. The front hall crowded with coats, the polished floors reflecting candlelight, and my mother greeting each guest with that flawless practice smile. 25 people waiting to be impressed. I could almost hear her voice carrying from room to room, trying to hide panic when she realized nothing was ready. It should have made me angry, but all I felt was distance. For years, I'd believed I owed her something: time, help, loyalty, forgiveness. But what I owed most now was to the people who believed in me. Just after 7, my phone buzzed with a string of notifications. The first text came from Jenna. "Mom says you're ruining Christmas. None of the caterers can take the job. Everything's booked." Another followed. "You can't do this to us." I set the phone aside again. 10 minutes later, it buzzed once more. "Veronica Chase is here. If you have any decency, you'll drive back right now." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Veronica sitting in my parents' dining room, while I sat here preparing for a meeting with her less than 24 hours later. The universe couldn't have scripted it better. As the night went on, the messages became frantic. Mom's calling every restaurant in the county. Guests are already arriving. We're ordering pizza. That last one stopped me. I read it twice, imagining the look on my mother's face as delivery boxes replaced her elaborate dinner plans. I pictured her trying to arrange them on china plates, desperate to keep her composure as conversation faltered. Another message came minutes later. Veronica looks disgusted. Mom's blaming you for everything. Then party's over. Everyone left early. Veronica didn't even stay for dessert. I let the phone fall silent after that. I stepped out onto the balcony again. The sky was deep navy now, the moon hanging low over the waves. Somewhere far north, my family was likely sitting in a room full of cold pizza and embarrassment. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. I didn't wish them pain, but I couldn't carry their consequences anymore. Inside, my phone buzzed once more, this time from Paula. Just saw the update from Veronica's assistant. Tomorrow's meeting is confirmed. You've got this. I turned off the phone, set it on the nightstand, and finally allowed myself to rest. Morning came bright and clear. The resort's conference floor smelled faintly of coffee and citrus polish. Nate was already setting up the presentation when I arrived. Everything's ready, he said, straightening his tie. Veronica's assistant called to confirm they're on their way up. I took a breath and looked out at the rows of chairs the company logos displayed across the room. 5 years of work had led to this. I checked my watch, 8:55. In less than 10 minutes, I'd be standing at the front of that room, presenting the biggest pitch of my career. Then my phone buzzed again, a string of missed calls lighting the screen. My mother, my father, Jenna. I didn't open them. I couldn't. Not now. The last time I had looked at my phone before a major event, it was to read one of my mother's lists of demands. This time, all I wanted to see were the words "contract signed." I slipped the phone into my bag and turned toward the conference doors just as they opened. Veronica entered with her team smiling as if last night had never happened. "Morning, Claire," she said warmly. "Ready to make some history?" Her tone was easy, but I caught a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. I wondered if she already knew the connection, or if that revelation was still waiting in the hours ahead. Either way, there was no going back now. We exchanged greetings, adjusted our notes, and the meeting began. Slide after slide, we outlined our proposal menus, logistics timelines, projected returns. The questions were sharp but fair. When it ended, Veronica stood, shook my hand, and said, "I think this partnership is going to change things for both of us." She didn't know yet how true that was. As her team began gathering their folders, she smiled again. By the way, she added lightly, "I owe you a story about the strangest Christmas Eve dinner I've ever attended." I felt the air catch just a little in my chest. The story I knew had already begun. When Veronica mentioned that Christmas Eve dinner, I stayed perfectly still. She didn't seem angry, just amused, almost bewildered. "You won't believe this," she began as we moved toward the elevator. "Last night I was at a house in Connecticut, a beautiful place, all marble and candles. The hostess, a woman named Diane Monroe, same last name as you, funny enough, had promised an elaborate dinner she said her daughter would prepare." She laughed softly, shaking her head. We arrived to find nothing ready. Not a single dish. An empty kitchen. By the end of the night, she was serving pizza on what looked like heirloom crystal. I managed a polite nod, the kind of reflex that comes from years of hiding a reaction. Veronica kept talking, oblivious to the weight her words carried. It was a scene Claire. The guests were polite, but you could feel the embarrassment. And through it all, she kept talking about her older daughter, how unreliable she was, how she couldn't hold a job. It was uncomfortable. I pressed the elevator button and stared at my reflection in the brushed steel doors. My mother had spent that entire evening criticizing me to the very woman who would be signing my company's biggest contract. When the doors opened, Veronica turned to me with an apologetic smile. "Anyway, let's forget that nonsense. You've built something remarkable. It's refreshing to meet a leader who doesn't hide behind a family name." I followed her into the lobby, the hum of conversation around us fading into background noise. She had no idea she was describing my own family, my own mother. Back in my suite, I sat by the window watching the palm trees sway in the coastal wind. My phone was lighting up again. Calls, texts, even voicemails. I ignored them all. I needed a clear head for the presentation. Around midnight, I received an email from Horizon Table's public relations contact confirming that Forbes would release the digital issue of its 40 Under 40 list at the end of the next day. My photo was on the cover paired with the headline, "From Invisible to Invaluable." The irony was sharp. My family would find out who I really was the same week they'd served delivery pizza to a Fortune 500 executive. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay awake listening to the ocean's steady pulse against the shore, thinking about the distance between the woman my mother described and the one preparing to walk into a boardroom. I wasn't angry, not exactly. It was something quieter, a deep certainty that the way things had always been could never continue. Morning light cut through the curtains in long gold stripes. By the time I entered the conference room, the Summit hospitality team was already gathering. Paula and Evan were setting up the presentation while Nate reviewed the contract summary with legal. I took my place at the front of the room, my notes neatly aligned beside a cup of coffee. Veronica walked in right on time, greeting everyone with her usual confidence. "Let's get started," she said, smiling in my direction. "I have a feeling this is going to be a very good day." The presentation ran smoothly. We covered menu development, logistics, projected revenue, and brand alignment. Questions came quickly, but my team had every answer ready. When it ended, Veronica leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful look in her eyes. "Claire," she said finally, "I've seen a lot of business proposals, but this is the first one that feels like a partnership instead of a transaction. You've built something extraordinary." I thanked her, keeping my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. Then, just as I was collecting my notes, Veronica's assistant hurried into the room with a tablet in her hand. "Ms. Chase, you'll want to see this," she said quietly. Veronica frowned and took the device. For a few seconds, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the projector. Then she looked up at me, surprise flickering across her face. "Claire," she said slowly, "this photo's going viral. It's from that dinner last night." She turned the tablet toward me. On the screen was an image of my parents' dining room, my mother standing in the background, her expression stiff, a stack of pizza boxes sitting open on the table. Someone captioned it, "When your perfect Christmas dinner turns into a delivery night." I looked at the image without flinching. "That's my mother," I said quietly. A murmur rippled through the room. Veronica blinked. "Your mother?" I nodded. "Yes, Diane Monroe. And the daughter she spent the night complaining about, that would be me." For a long moment no one spoke. Veronica glanced around at her team, then back at me. "You mean to tell me the woman who served us pizza is your mother?" Her tone was more astonishment than disbelief. "Yes," I said. "She doesn't know about Horizon Table. She doesn't know what I do for a living." The room went still again, and then Veronica exhaled a slow, incredulous laugh. She spent the entire evening telling everyone her daughter couldn't hold a job. Her eyes met mine. "And that daughter is the CEO I've been trying to meet for 2 years. Nate shifted slightly beside me. Evan's expression was unreadable, though I caught the faintest trace of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Veronica sat back, still half laughing, half stunned. "That's one for the record books," she said finally. "What are the odds?" Her assistant was already scrolling through something else on the tablet. "Ms. Chase," she said, "Forbes just posted their digital cover for tomorrow's issue." She turned the screen toward the group again. There I was, my professional photo, the same one I'd approved last week, beneath the headline that now filled the screen. Veronica read the title out loud, "From Invisible to Invaluable, How Claire Monroe Built a Luxury Catering Empire Without a Dollar of Family Support." The silence that followed was absolute. Veronica's eyes met mine again, and for the first time there was something like admiration in her voice. "Well," she said, "I suppose your mother's going to have an interesting morning." I couldn't help a faint smile. "Probably," I said. Veronica stood closing the folder in front of her. "I don't need to think this over," she said. "We're signing today. You've earned it." She extended her hand across the table. I took it. "Welcome to Summit Hospitality, Claire." Cameras clicked as the team documented the signing standard PR procedure, nothing unusual. But when Veronica turned to her assistant, I noticed her thumb moving over her phone screen. "I just posted our partnership announcement," she said. "Tagged your company, of course." Within minutes, messages started flooding in emails, notifications, congratulatory texts from colleagues and clients. Horizon Table's account began lighting up with new followers and press mentions. My phone buzzed again and again, but one notification froze me in place. Veronica had tagged not only my company, but also Diane Monroe of Connecticut. I looked at her startled. "You tagged my mother?" Veronica smiled knowingly. She told every guest last night that Summit was her daughter's connection. I thought it was only fair she see the truth firsthand. Across the table, Nate chuckled under his breath. "Poetic," he murmured. I didn't answer. My phone was vibrating nonstop, now calls, texts, and a dozen missed messages from Jenna. Veronica poured champagne into 2 glasses and handed one to me. "To new beginnings," she said, "and to women who refuse to be underestimated." I clinked her glass lightly, then glanced down as my phone flashed once more. A new text from my father appeared on the screen. "Your mother just fainted. What is Horizon Table?" The irony was sharp enough to sting. The story that had been hidden for years was out in the open, and the people who dismissed me were now forced to face it. Veronica raised her glass again, her smile warm but certain. "You know, Claire," she said softly, "sometimes the best revenge is just being exactly who they thought you couldn't be." The cameras flashed again, capturing a moment I'd spent years working toward. My hand didn't shake as I signed the final page. Somewhere far away, my phone kept ringing. I let it. The next part of this story had already begun, and this time it was on my terms. When I left the conference room, the sound of applause followed me down the hall. Cameras had captured every moment, Veronica shaking my hand, the champagne, the signed contract. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since she'd posted the announcement. Horizon Table was tagged in dozens of congratulatory posts. But my mother's name was right there too. I didn't have to imagine her reaction. It was already happening in real time. By the time I returned to my suite, there were 57 missed calls. I scrolled through the list, Mom, Dad, Jenna, over and over again. The latest voicemail came from my father. His voice was tight, almost pleading. "Claire, call your mother. She's in shock. She doesn't understand what's happening." I sat on the edge of the bed and stared out at the ocean. The waves kept rolling steady and indifferent. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I picked up the phone and called home. Mom answered on the first ring. "How could you do this to us?" Her voice cracked between anger and panic. "Veronica called me. She said you're her new partner." Everyone saw her post. "People are calling me, asking how we didn't know our own daughter was a CEO." Her breath came fast, the way it always did when her control slipped. "You embarrassed us, Claire. You made us look like fools." I took a slow breath. "Mom, I didn't embarrass you. I built something. You just never cared to see it." "You lied," she shot back. "You let us believe I didn't let you believe anything I said quietly. You decided who I was and never bothered to ask if it was true." For once, she didn't interrupt. I could hear my father's voice faintly in the background asking her to calm down. She ignored him. "You should have told us, Claire. We're your family." I stared at the window's reflection. The woman looking back at me wasn't the one who used to shrink at that voice. "I tried," I said, finally. "You never listened." The line was silent long enough that I almost thought she'd hung up. Then she said softer this time, "You humiliated this family." "No," I answered, steady but calm. I told the truth. I hesitated for a moment. "The Forbes article comes out at midnight. Maybe read it before you decide what kind of story you want to tell about me." Her breath caught. "You told Forbes about us. I told them about myself," I said. "That's all I've ever wanted to do." There was a rustle on the other end, maybe my father taking the phone, but before he could speak, she ended the call. The room fell quiet again. I let the silence settle, then turned my phone face down. Outside, the light had shifted to evening gold, the kind that makes everything look honest. I stood for a while watching the sun sink below the horizon until another message appeared on my screen. This time, it was Jenna. Her text came in short bursts, each one more frantic than the last. "This can't be real. Mom's losing it. Veronica's post is everywhere. How could you do this without telling us? Then another, you made us a laughingstock. Everyone at the club is talking. I didn't answer right away. A few minutes later came one more. Please just explain. Did you really build that company? I typed back 3 words. Yes, I did. I didn't hear from her again that night. The next morning, my inbox was overflowing. Reporters wanted interviews. New clients wanted quotes. Veronica's team had scheduled a joint press call for the afternoon. Horizon Table's social pages were flooded with messages of congratulations and press inquiries. Paula texted a picture from our main office staff gathered around a monitor watching the announcement replay on a business channel. "They're so proud, Claire," she wrote. "It's like we all won." I smiled for the first time in days. Whatever chaos was waiting in Connecticut here, there was peace. By the time my flight touched down in New York that evening, the Forbes cover was everywhere. Digital headlines, industry newsletters, even morning talk segments. I checked my phone at the gate. Among the new notifications were 3 missed calls from Dad and a single message that stood out. "Your mother fainted. She's fine now. Please call when you can." I didn't call right away. Instead, I took a cab straight to the office. Paula and Evan met me in the lobby, both grinning despite the late hour. "We have to show you something," Evan said. In the break room, the whole team had gathered around a laptop. The LinkedIn post from Veronica had gone viral, hundreds of thousands of reactions, comments from industry leaders, former clients, and even competitors. The caption read, "Thrilled to announce our partnership with Horizon Table and its visionary founder Claire Monroe. Proof that hard work and integrity still build empires." Someone had left a plate of cupcakes on the counter, each one topped with little edible gold stars. On one of them, written in icing, was the word boss. It made me laugh quietly. As the celebration continued around me, I glanced down at my phone again. Another message from Jenna appeared. "Mom can't stop crying. Everyone's asking questions. Please answer her." I stepped outside into the cool night air and finally called home again. This time my father answered. "Claire," he said, voice heavy with exhaustion, "I think we owe you an apology. I didn't speak right away." He continued, "I knew you were doing something with catering. I saw the business registration once, but your mother said it was small. I should have looked closer. I should have listened." For a moment I heard the background noise of the house, the faint clink of dishes, the steady hum of the refrigerator, a sound I'd grown up with. "Why didn't you?" I asked quietly. He sighed. It was easier to believe the story we'd told ourselves, that Jenna was the successful one, that you'd find your footing eventually. Your mother and I, we were wrong. The honesty in his tone caught me off guard. "Dad, this isn't about revenge," I said. "It's about truth." "I know," he replied. "And we see it now. The calls, the articles, the photos. It's all anyone can talk about here." His voice softened. "You didn't hurt us, Claire. We did that to ourselves." We talked for a few minutes longer. He told me the party disaster had already made its way through every circle they belonged to. "Your mother is the talk of the country club," he said quietly. "People keep asking how she could serve pizza on fine china while her daughter was signing million-dollar contracts in Florida." I almost felt sorry for her, almost. When we hung up, I stayed outside for a long time listening to the city hum. Inside, my staff was still celebrating. I thought about what my father said, how easy it had been for them to believe a story that kept me small. It wasn't cruelty at first. It was convenience. Over the next few days, the fallout spread fast. My parents' reputation in their social circles took a sharp dive. Jenna's PR firm lost the Summit account within 48 hours, and word traveled quickly. A few other clients followed suit, quietly withdrawing contracts. My mother was removed from 2 charity boards under the polite excuse of restructuring. Every headline about Horizon Table carried that same subtext: the daughter they underestimated had outgrown their approval. Meanwhile, business doubled. Paula and Evan worked overtime managing inquiries, and Nate called from the finance office to tell me we were projecting record revenue for the quarter. The documentary offer from Food Network was already moving forward. My team thrived, each of them knowing they had built this with me. Still at night, when the emails stopped and the city went quiet, I thought about the house in Connecticut. I wondered if my mother sat at that long dining table, looking at the empty chairs, realizing how much of me she'd never known. A few days later, a short text arrived from her. "We need to talk." I read it twice, then set the phone aside. Not yet. The story she built was falling apart, and for the first time she'd have to meet me on even ground. The next call I answered wouldn't be hers. It would be one that marked the start of something new. 2 weeks after the contract signing, the world around me had shifted. Our office phones rang, nonstop interview requests poured in, and clients who once hesitated now scrambled to book us months in advance. The story had taken on a life of its own. The daughter her parents dismissed becomes a Forbes cover success. Every magazine wanted to tell it. But underneath the excitement, there was a stillness in me, a quiet recognition that some things had changed for good. On a Friday morning, Paula walked into my office with a printout from our latest projections. $10 million in new contracts since the announcement, she said, setting the pages on my desk. "We're going to need another sous chef by spring." Evan followed behind her, his tie slightly crooked, grinning like a man who hadn't slept in days, and a bigger storage facility. "The current space won't hold all the equipment once the expansion hits." I leaned back in my chair, letting their words sink in. Horizon Table was no longer just stable, it was thriving. Between meetings, I checked my phone. More texts from home filled the screen, most of them from my father. "Your mother's been quiet. She won't go to the club. Jenna's struggling with work. Call when you can." I didn't reply right away. The distance was still necessary. When I did speak with him later that evening, his tone was softer than I'd ever heard it. "Claire, your mother's realizing things she never wanted to see," he said. "People have stopped pretending around her. It's been humbling." He paused, then added, "You don't have to forgive her yet, but she's trying." I didn't know what trying meant to him, but I let it pass. He told me Jenna's firm had lost 3 major clients and she'd started seeing a therapist. "She asked me for your number," he said carefully. "I told her you'd call when you were ready." I thanked him and changed the subject to something safer. The weather, the markets, anything that didn't reach too deep. The following week, Veronica invited me to a networking gala in Midtown. The ballroom shimmered with soft gold light crystal glasses catching reflections of the city skyline. "I wanted you here," she said, as she linked her arm through mine. "Everyone in this room knows your story, and most of them admire it." Across the room, executives from several luxury brands waved her over. "They'll all want to meet you tonight," she added with a wink. "Just remember to enjoy it." I smiled politely, but inside, part of me was still adjusting to being seen. As the night went on, a woman from Business Ledger stopped me near the buffet table. "You're Claire Monroe," she said, her voice full of recognition, "the one whose mother served pizza on Waterford Crystal." I managed a measured laugh. "That's me," I said, "though I prefer to think of myself as the woman who built Horizon Table." Her face flushed. "Of course," she said quickly. "You've handled it all with such grace." I thanked her and moved on, but the comment lingered in the back of my mind. The next morning, I arrived at the office early. The building was quiet except for the hum of the espresso machine. Paula was already there reviewing vendor quotes. "I saw the article about you on LinkedIn," she said without looking up. "They called you the quiet revolutionary of the catering world." I smiled. "That's generous." She closed the folder and looked at me. "Claire, whatever you decide about your family, don't let them drag you back into the old story. You've built something better." Her words stayed with me long after she left the room. Later that week, my phone buzzed during a team meeting. It was Jenna. Her message was simple. "Can we meet, just the two of us?" For a long moment, I stared at the screen. I hadn't seen her since the wedding the year before, when our mother had introduced me as between jobs. I typed back a single word, "Maybe." 2 days later, she showed up unannounced at the Horizon Table headquarters. I found her in the lobby fidgeting with her purse strap. She looked smaller somehow, tired, worn in a way I hadn't seen before. "I didn't think you'd come down," she said when I approached. "You said maybe." I took the chance. I motioned toward the conference room. "Let's talk in here." Inside, the air felt still. She sat across from me, folding her hands. "Mom's not doing well," she said after a moment. "She's embarrassed, yes, but she's scared too. The phone doesn't ring anymore. Friends avoid her." I nodded but said nothing. She kept going. "I know what we did to you. I know how cruel it was to keep you small so she could feel big. I'm sorry." Her voice trembled, and for the first time in years, I saw the little sister who used to sneak into my room at night during thunderstorms. "I've started therapy," she said quietly. "The therapist calls it a family system. Someone had to be the scapegoat so everyone else could feel successful. That was you. I helped keep it that way." She looked up, her eyes glossy. "I want to do better." I believed her sincerity, but trust didn't return that quickly. "Then keep doing the work," I said gently. "Change doesn't start with me." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Before she left, she whispered, "I miss having a sister." I didn't know what to say, so I let her go with a quiet goodbye. After she left, I sat alone in the conference room for a long time. Through the glass wall, I could see my team moving through their day, voices, low hands busy, a rhythm built on respect. It struck me how different this kind of family felt. No manipulation, no guilt, just shared purpose. I pulled out my notebook and began writing ideas for the company's next phase New Cities training programs, maybe a scholarship for young chefs without connections. Something lasting. Something that mirrored what I'd learned the hard way. A week later, my father called again. His voice was subdued. "Your mother wants to see you," he said. "She's been asking every day. She says she's ready to listen." I hesitated. "I'll think about it," I told him. After we hung up, I sat by the window of my apartment overlooking the park, the city lights flickering below. Part of me wanted to leave the past where it was. Another part, the one that still remembered the sound of my grandmother's voice at family dinners, whispered that maybe closure was possible. The following morning, I drafted an email to Paula and Evan outlining the next month's projects, then paused at the end of the message. For the first time, I signed it, Claire Monroe, CEO, Horizon Table, without a trace of hesitation. The woman who used to cook in the shadows had learned how to stand fully in her own light. As I closed my laptop, my phone buzzed again, a text from my father. "Dinner. Neutral ground. Next week. She'll listen this time." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed a single reply, "I'll be there." The air outside was crisp when I stepped onto the balcony. The skyline glowed faintly pink against the fading light. Somewhere across the city, my mother was preparing her own kind of table, one without servants, one where she'd have to face me as an equal. I didn't know what would happen when we met, but I knew this much: for the first time in years, the choice was entirely mine. The restaurant my father chose sat on a quiet corner of Manhattan's Upper West Side. No cameras, no crowd, just warm light from the windows and the low hum of a piano somewhere in back. When I arrived, he was already standing near the entrance, smoothing the front of his jacket, as if preparing for something delicate. "They're here," he said softly. "We got a table in the private room." Inside the space was small set for 4. My mother looked different, less polished, almost fragile. The pearls she always wore were gone, replaced by a simple silver chain. Jenna sat beside her, fingers wrapped around a glass of water she hadn't touched. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then my father gestured toward the table. "Let's sit." The silence stretched as the waiter poured water and left us alone. My mother was the first to speak. "Thank you for coming, Claire." Her voice was quieter than I remembered. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," I said. She nodded, accepting that. "I don't expect forgiveness," she began carefully, "but I need you to hear me." She paused, eyes fixed on her hands. "I've spent most of my life building an image I thought mattered. I used my daughters to hold it together, Jenna, as the example, you as the helper. I told myself it was normal." She took a slow breath. "Then I watched that image collapse in a single night. All those people I wanted to impress disappeared when the truth came out. I listened, keeping my voice even. You hurt me, Mom. Not once or twice, every time you made me smaller to make yourself comfortable." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I know, and I'm sorry. Not because of what people think, but because I finally understand how wrong it was. You deserved better from me." My father cleared his throat softly. "We both failed you," he said. "I went along with things I knew weren't right. I thought keeping the peace was love. It wasn't." His words came haltingly, as if he'd rehearsed them but still didn't trust his own voice. Jenna shifted her tone low. You didn't just build a business, Claire. You built something I never had the courage to chase. I wanted people to like me. You wanted something real. She looked down at her glass. I'm proud of you. The words hit harder than I expected. For a long moment, none of us said anything. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a single sheet of paper. These are my terms, I said, setting it in the middle of the table. My mother hesitated before unfolding it. Her eyes moved down the page slowly. Equal respect, she read aloud. No more servant treatment. Public acknowledgement. Genuine apology. Therapy, family, and individual. Non-negotiable. That's right, I said. If you want me in your lives, that's the starting point. I'll be your daughter, not your help. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she nodded. I agree to every word. My father reached across the table. So do I. Jenna exhaled shakily. Me too. I don't want to repeat the patterns that made us this way. For the first time in years, the weight in the room shifted. Not gone, not healed, but lighter. My mother looked at me with something I hadn't seen in her eyes since childhood. Respect, maybe even admiration. We've lost so much already, she said softly. I don't want to lose you too. I folded the paper back and placed it in my purse. Then hold yourselves to it. Dinner arrived and conversation turned to simpler things. The city work, my father's garden back in Connecticut. At one point, Jenna smiled faintly and said, It feels strange to talk without pretending. I nodded. It does. When the plates were cleared, my mother reached into her bag and pulled out a small white envelope. I wrote something, she said, sliding it toward me. You can read it when you're ready. I placed it beside my purse but didn't open it. Some things needed time. Outside the air was cool and sharp. My father hugged me first, a quiet, steady embrace that said more than words. My mother hesitated, then stepped closer. You've built a life worth being proud of, she said. Thank you for giving us a chance to do better. I nodded. We'll see where it goes. That night I walked home through the park. The city lights flickered against the trees, and somewhere in the distance someone was playing a saxophone. When I reached my building, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, uneven ink smudged in a few places. Claire, it began, you've always been the strong one. I used to mistake your quiet for weakness. Now I see it was strength I didn't have. You taught me that love isn't control. It's seeing someone as they are and choosing to stand beside them anyway. I hope you'll let us try to stand beside you now. I folded the letter carefully and set it on my desk. The weeks that followed were quiet. My parents started therapy just as they'd promised. My father called every few days to check in, not out of obligation, but genuine interest. Jenna reached out too. She'd taken on smaller clients at her firm, focusing on rebuilding instead of pretending. It's strange, she told me during one of our calls. I used to think success meant being seen. Now I think it means being whole. At Horizon Table, life moved forward. Our staff doubled, new partnerships rolled in, and the documentary with Food Network began filming. The title still made me smile, From Invisible to Invaluable, The Claire Monroe Story. One afternoon, Veronica stopped by the office unannounced. She watched the crew setting up and grinned. I told you the world would know your name, she said. How's your family? I thought for a moment before answering. Healing. She nodded, satisfied. That's a good word. Then she raised an eyebrow. Any plans to celebrate this new chapter? I looked around the office, the space filled with laughter, clinking coffee mugs, and the steady rhythm of something built on trust. Maybe a dinner, I said, but not one I cook myself. Veronica laughed. That seems fair. That evening I sent a single message to the family group chat I hadn't used in years. Dinner at my place next month. My treat. Bring open hearts and appetites. It took less than a minute for the replies to appear. My father wouldn't miss it. Jenna, can I bring dessert? And finally my mother. Thank you. We'll be there. When I put my phone down, the city outside my window was beginning to glow with the soft lights of dusk. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the invisible daughter waiting to be invited to her own table. I was the one setting it, and this time everyone would have a seat. Still, I knew forgiveness wasn't a single moment. It was a series of choices, one conversation at a time. The real test would come when they sat across from me again, surrounded by the very success they once ignored. That dinner would decide everything. The night of that dinner came with a stillness I hadn't felt in years. My apartment glowed with soft light, the kind that made glassware shimmer and conversations sound gentle. Horizon Table's team had outdone themselves. Paula's chefs had turned my home into a quiet, elegant showcase. Every dish was perfect, every detail precise. But this time, I wasn't working. I was hosting as myself. At exactly 7, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, my parents stood side by side, looking uncertain but genuine. My mother held a small bouquet of lilies, the same kind she used to grow when I was a child. "For you," she said, her voice steady but soft. Jenna followed behind them, carrying a pie dish that smelled like cinnamon and apples. "I baked this myself," she said with a small smile. It wasn't much, but it meant everything. I led them into the dining room. The table was already set white linen silver flatware, tall candles flickering against the windows. For once, the quiet wasn't tense. It was peaceful. Paula's staff moved silently in the background, serving appetizers before excusing themselves, leaving us alone. My mother looked around and said, "It's beautiful, Claire. You've built something extraordinary." There was no envy in her tone, no edge, just honesty. "Thank you," I said, meeting her eyes. "I'm glad you're here." Dinner began slowly, each of us careful, almost polite. But as the evening went on, the walls began to drop. My father shared stories from when I was a baby, details I'd never heard before. Jenna talked about her new clients and how she was rebuilding her firm from the ground up. Even my mother laughed, though sometimes it caught halfway between amusement and regret. Halfway through dessert, she set down her fork and looked at me. "I owe you one more apology," she said. "For all those years I treated you like staff instead of family. For every time I dismissed your worth." She took a breath. "You were never the disappointment." I was. I didn't rush to respond. Instead, I reached for her hand across the table. "Mom," I said quietly, "we can't change what's behind us, but we can choose how we move forward." Her eyes filled again, but this time with something lighter relief maybe. My father nodded, and for a brief second it felt like the family I'd once hoped we could be. After dinner, I walked them to the door. My mother hugged me, hesitant at first, then fully. "You're not invisible anymore," she whispered, "and I'm proud to be seen standing beside you." When they left, Jenna lingered a moment longer. "You know," she said with a small laugh, "I'd like to pitch for Horizon Table's PR work someday." I smiled. "Submit a proposal. We'll review it like everyone else." She laughed again, this time without defensiveness. When the door closed behind them, I stood there for a moment, surrounded by quiet. It wasn't the silence of isolation anymore. It was the calm that comes when you've reclaimed your own space. The dining table gleamed under the lights, a symbol of something that had once been used to control me, now turned into something I chose to share on my own terms. A week later, the Food Network documentary aired. They called it From Invisible to Invaluable. Watching it, I saw my journey laid bare, years of work, quiet resilience, and a few moments of hard truth. The closing shot showed me standing in the Horizon Table kitchen, surrounded by my team, their laughter echoing through the room. It wasn't just my success. It was ours. As the credits rolled, I thought about the lesson that had taken me more than a decade to learn. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It's steady. It's choosing yourself even when no one else does. It's building something so strong that it can't be erased by the people who once refused to see you. These days, my family keeps their promises. My parents attend therapy every week. Jenna and I talk often, sometimes about work, sometimes about life. And every holiday they come to my home where no one cooks alone and everyone clears their own plate. I've learned that respect isn't something you beg for, it's something you require, and love, the kind that lasts, only grows in the presence of equality. So if you've ever been made to feel small in a room you helped build, remember this: your worth doesn't shrink because someone else can't recognize it. Stand tall, build your own table, and when you do, make sure every seat at it is earned. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched something in you, if you've ever had to find your voice after being silenced, share it. Someone else might need to hear that they're not alone. And until next time, take care of yourself and never forget your own worth.